We have been sold a captivating illusion about human progress. For decades, tech visionaries promised us a pristine, digital utopia, a world where physical files would vanish into the ether, replaced entirely by glowing screens. Yet, check the shipping boxes piling up at your door, the receipts stuffed in your wallet, the endless packaging in your trash. We are currently producing and consuming more of this fragile, combustible material than at any other point in human history. Why? Because we fundamentally misunderstand the driving forces of innovation. Welcome to the untold, astonishing story of the world's most ubiquitous, yet entirely invisible, foundation. We suffer from a profound technological fallacy. We have been taught in schools that standalone inventions magically change society. We think a man built a printing press, and suddenly, the unwashed masses learned how to read. But history actually operates in reverse. Society evolves first, creating a desperate collective need, and technology simply rushes in to fill that void. The printing press did not create a hunger for knowledge. A pre-existing hunger demanded a machine that could reproduce words faster, and that revolutionary machine could only exist because a soft, pliable, and incredibly cheap medium had already paved the way. It is a paradox of physics. It is incredibly light. It tears with the slightest force. It dissolves entirely in water and bursts into flames in mere seconds. Yet, this fragile weave of cellulose fibers has toppled absolute monarchs, birthed entirely new religions, mapped the distant stars, and codified universal human rights. It is the silent, unassuming architecture of modern civilization. Without it, the Renaissance would have stalled indefinitely. The scientific revolution would have been utterly forgotten, and the modern nation-state could never function. For centuries, the true measure of a civilization's advancement wasn't its weaponry or hoarded gold. It was how much of this simple fiber it could produce. To trace its brilliant origins, we must travel back over 2 millennia to the heart of ancient China. Imagine a world where knowledge is literally a heavy, physical burden. To read a single philosophical text, dedicated scholars had to carry heavy carts loaded with bound bamboo slips. Alternatively, vital words were painstakingly carved into animal bones or cast into incredibly heavy bronze vessels. The transmission of complex ideas was heavily bottlenecked by the sheer physical weight of the storage medium. The growing empire desperately needed to expand its administration, but a vast bureaucracy cannot efficiently run on bamboo. A radical, lightweight solution was urgently required. Legend points to a highly resourceful court official who closely observed the natural world. He gathered mulberry bark, discarded hemp, old rags, and frayed fishing nets. He pounded these seemingly useless scraps into a wet, fibrous pulp, suspended it in vats of water, and sifted it through a fine screen. As the water drained away and the random fibers dried and firmly intertwined, an absolute miracle was left behind. It was thin, surprisingly flexible, completely smooth, and absorbed ink beautifully. Suddenly, the crushing weight of 1,000 complex words was reduced to the weight of a feather. This was the ultimate liberation of human thought. For centuries, the empire fiercely guarded this manufacturing secret with its life. This invention swiftly became the backbone of a spectacular golden age, enabling the mass administration of an unbelievably vast territory. It birthed breathtaking brush calligraphy, sweeping landscape paintings, and the very first form of fiat currency, a concept so radically abstract it completely baffled foreign outsiders. The Chinese were already mass-producing written works using intricate woodblock printing long before Europe even knew this magical material existed. The empire expanded rapidly, riding confidently on the wings of these delicate sheets. But a secret this powerful, this essential, could never be contained forever. Through the violent clash of expanding empires and the bustling, relentless trade of the Silk Road, the closely guarded recipe finally escaped its borders. By the 8th century, it reached the Islamic world. The timing was nothing short of perfect. The Islamic Golden Age was just dawning, and an insatiable, widespread thirst for knowledge was sweeping across the Middle East. While empires of the past ruthlessly hoarded gold and jewels, the great caliphates hoarded books. They built massive, water-powered mills along rushing rivers to pound linen and hemp, creating a sophisticated industry of unprecedented scale. The material transitioned from a rare, imported luxury to a daily commodity. Baghdad quickly transformed into the undisputed intellectual capital of the world, boasting a bustling, vibrant market with over 100 busy shops selling books. Dedicated scribes worked tirelessly day and night, translating ancient Greek, Indian, and Persian texts for a new generation. Mathematics, algebra, astronomy, and medicine advanced at a truly staggering pace. Why? Because for the very first time in Western history, brilliant scholars could finally afford to draft, calculate, scratch out, discard, and rewrite. True innovation requires the absolute freedom to make mistakes, and this cheap new material provided the ultimate, forgiving canvas for trial and error. Complex, multi-page equations simply aren't possible on priceless animal skins. Meanwhile, Europe was languishing deeply in the intellectual stagnation of the Dark Ages. Their written medium of choice was parchment or vellum, made by meticulously scraping, stretching, and drying the skins of sheep, calves, and goats. To produce just a single complete Bible, a monastery might have to slaughter an entire flock of 200 sheep. It was a painstaking, bloody, foul-smelling, and prohibitively expensive process. Because the physical medium was so incredibly rare and costly, literacy remained the exclusive, heavily guarded domain of the ultra-rich elite and the powerful clergy. Europe was intellectually starved, quite simply for lack of an affordable surface to write upon. When this Eastern miracle finally crossed the Mediterranean Sea and entered Europe, it was initially met with deep, ingrained suspicion. The powerful church scoffed at it, dismissing it as a fragile, pagan invention, vastly inferior to the supposedly divine, durable skins of God's own creatures. Official legal documents were strictly forbidden to be written on it, but brutal economics always wins out over rigid ideology. It was simply too incredibly cheap and far too practical to ignore. Rising merchants desperately needed it to keep complex accounting ledgers. Emerging universities, slowly awakening from a long slumber, violently demanded it for their eager students. The stage was finally set for the most explosive cultural revolution in human history. Enter Johannes Gutenberg. We often credit him with single-handedly dragging Europe out of the Middle Ages, but Gutenberg was fundamentally a savvy businessman responding to a massive, screaming market demand. The universities and merchants were already ravenous for texts. His mechanical printing press was a stroke of genius, but it would have been an utter commercial failure without a cheap medium to print on. Printing on vellum was astronomically expensive. It took hundreds of animal skins for one Bible. Gutenberg's machine required the exact material the Arabs had brought to Europe centuries earlier. The press was merely the engine. This fiber was the essential fuel. With the perfect synergy of the press and the page, information went viral for the first time in human history. When a relatively unknown monk named Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door, it wasn't the physical act that shattered the Catholic Church's monopoly on truth. It was the fact that his followers immediately copied, printed, and distributed his fiery words on thousands of inexpensive sheets. Within weeks, his ideas had flooded Europe. The Protestant Reformation wasn't just a theological shift. It was the world's first mass media campaign, waged entirely on the battlefield of affordable cellulose. The dominoes kept falling. The scientific revolution ignited not just because brilliant minds were looking through telescopes, but because they could finally share their radical findings across borders. Astronomers, physicists, and anatomists wrote countless letters, published groundbreaking journals, and sketched detailed anatomical diagrams. The cost of sharing a complex heretical idea dropped to nearly zero. The Enlightenment itself was built on the back of pamphlets, broadsheets, and encyclopedias. Ideas were no longer trapped in the isolated minds of a privileged few. They were democratized, packaged into thin, folded bundles, and shipped to the masses. Fast forward to the dawn of modern democracy. The American Revolution was arguably won by ink and fiber before a single shot was fired at Lexington. Thomas Paine's Common Sense wasn't a heavy, expensive book. It was a cheap, disposable pamphlet. It passed from hand to hand in taverns, was read aloud in public squares, and ignited the flames of rebellion in the hearts of common farmers. The very foundations of new republics, constitutions, declarations, and laws required a medium that could be easily distributed to every citizen. The nation-state was literally forged on this unassuming material. But this explosive growth created a terrifying crisis. By the 19th century, the world was literally running out of raw materials. Remember, this miraculous sheet was still made primarily from recycled linen and cotton rags. As literacy skyrocketed and the daily newspaper became a staple of urban life, a desperate rag shortage gripped the globe. A massive, grim shadow economy of rag pickers emerged in major cities, scavenging through filth to feed the insatiable, roaring bellies of the mills. The world's thirst for information was severely constrained by the number of old shirts people threw away. Once again, society screamed for a solution, and technology scrambled to answer. In the mid-1800s, inventors discovered a way to unlock cellulose from a virtually infinite source: trees. By grinding wood into pulp and treating it with harsh chemicals, they created a continuous, unstoppable river of production. Prices plummeted to fractions of a penny. The modern publishing industry, the penny press, the comic book, and the mass-market paperback were born. However, this acidic wood pulp had a tragic flaw. It slowly destroyed itself. The golden age of mass communication was built on a medium destined to crumble into yellow dust. Simultaneously, the Industrial Revolution birthed the modern corporation, and with it, the soul-crushing weight of infinite bureaucracy. The invention of the typewriter, carbon copy paper, and the standardized filing cabinet turned office workers into cogs in a massive administrative machine. The 20th century was entirely buried in a blizzard of memos, invoices, receipts, and triplicate forms. We designed our entire global economy around the physical routing of these rectangular white sheets. The material had mutated from a liberating vehicle of enlightenment into the very chains of modern bureaucratic drudgery. Which brings us to the great digital lie of the late 20th century. The personal computer was heralded as the definitive assassin of the physical page. Yet the opposite happened. What did we put next to every computer? A personal printer. Suddenly, anyone could generate 50 pages of high-quality text at the push of a button. Instead of eliminating the physical copy, digital technology democratized its creation, leading to the highest consumption rates in human history. We merely used our digital tools to print more efficiently. Even today, in our era of smartphones and cloud storage, we remain utterly dependent on this ancient technology. Every item you order online with a single tap arrives in a corrugated cardboard box. The booming e-commerce economy is, in reality, a colossal global logistics network moving millions of tons of processed tree pulp. We have digitized the transaction, but the physical delivery still relies on the exact same principles of folded cellulose that the Chinese perfected 2,000 years ago. We are a digital society desperately trapped inside a cardboard shell. So, what is the fundamental truth? Technology doesn't tell us who we are or what we need. We are a fiercely social, intensely curious species that desperately needs to record our existence, share our deepest thoughts, and package our physical world. The medium changes, from bamboo to rags to wood to pixels, but the human drive remains constant. The next time you hold a simple blank sheet, do not see just a disposable object. See the quiet conqueror of the world, the humble mirror of our relentless, unstoppable evolution.